Formula One isn't just a sport, it's a show. It's a mix of money, politics, engineering, and raw ambition. You can't just show up in the paddock without an invite, and you don't drive those cars unless you're born rich or have the money to force your way in. But once in a while, someone comes along who doesn't just fit in. They change the whole game. And that one is Sir Lewis Hamilton. He wasn't rich. He came from a normal working class family. But he stood on top of the world and brought change to the F1 paddock like no one else before.
Best driver because he's fast. And one day it's going to be in Formula 1.
I grew up in racing. My first car was remote control, and even though I was only 4, I already had a competitive streak. I mean, look at me. Have you ever seen a more intense kid? I started karting when I was 8. And to be honest, it started out as a hobby. Something for my dad and I to do together. Something we were both interested in. At one point, my dad had 4 jobs just to keep us karting. At night after work, he would be in the garage working on the car. I mean, he gave up everything for me.
Got it right.
But it was his support that made me feel like I could do anything.
Imagine being in a Formula 1 car. Must be very powerful, that.
I wouldn't be a 4-time world champion if it wasn't for my dad. He taught me that if you want something, you need to go after it and never give up.
When Hamilton was born on a cold January day in 1985, in the working-class town of Stevenage, no one, not even those closest to him, could have guessed that this boy would eventually become the greatest driver the sport has ever seen. His father, Anthony, and mother, Carmen, would divorce just a couple of years later, splitting young Lewis's childhood into 2 households and 2 worlds.
My car feels really powerful when I'm in it, but imagine being in a Formula 1 car. Must be very powerful, that.
Well, he was not so privileged like all the other drivers that have reached F1. He wasn't the son of a team principal, he wasn't from Monaco, he wasn't backed by a billionaire family. What he had instead was a second-hand go-kart his dad could barely afford, and a tenacity that couldn't be bought. His father had to do 4 jobs just to keep the kart running, often sleeping only a few hours a night. Lewis, meanwhile, would be found either outside practicing or inside staring at a screen, memorizing virtual racing lines on Grand Prix 2. It wasn't a game to him, it was a mission. But the story of Hamilton is also the story of navigating a sport that for a very long time didn't know how to handle someone who looked like him. Growing up, he faced racial abuse in school, bananas thrown at him, names hurled his way, teachers who looked the other way. There was no diversity initiative, no outstretched hand from the FIA. There was just Lewis, quiet, withdrawn, and processing it all. I just kept it to myself. He would later admit, boxing and karate helped, but nothing matched the peace and power he felt behind the wheel. At age 10, Hamilton stunned the karting world by winning the British Kart Championship. It wasn't just the win, it was the way he drove. Smooth, calculated, aggressive when needed, but clinical when it mattered most. By the time he was 13, Ron Dennis, then the head of McLaren, had seen enough. He offered Hamilton a contract to support his career all the way to F1 if he kept his grades up. It was unprecedented. A boy from Stevenage, still riding in the backseat of his father's car, now had a direct line to the highest echelon of motorsport. Hamilton didn't waste the opportunity. He dominated every single level of racing he touched. Formula Renault, Formula 3 Euro Series, GP2, his rise wasn't slow, it was meteoric, and in 2007, the impossible became real. Lewis Hamilton, a young black Briton with dreadlocks and diamond earrings, was on the Formula 1 grid in McLaren. He wasn't there to make up the numbers, he was there to win, and win he did. Pole positions, podiums, pressure that would crush most rookies barely made him blink. By the time the final flag dropped in his debut season, Hamilton had finished just 1 point behind the title. The next year, he made sure there would be no doubts. In one of the most dramatic season finales ever, Hamilton snatched the championship on the final corner of the final lap at Interlagos, denying Felipe Massa in front of his home fans. He was 23, the youngest champion ever. But what made the moment even more powerful was the sight of him embracing his father in the rain. It wasn't just a victory for Lewis, it was validation for every sacrifice Anthony had ever made. The following years were more turbulent. McLaren lost its edge, the car wasn't good enough, the politics inside the team became harder to manage, and perhaps, most symbolically, Hamilton chose to part ways with his father as his manager in 2010. It was a painful decision, but one that marked a shift. Lewis was now truly on his own. In 2013, he made what many considered a bizarre move. He left McLaren for Mercedes, a team that at the time had won just a single race since its return to F1. Critics laughed. They said he was chasing money, that he made a career-ending mistake. But Hamilton, as always, had seen something the rest hadn't. And then, the hybrid era began. From 2014 onwards, Hamilton entered a zone that not even the greats had reached. The statistics speak for themselves. Double-digit race wins in season after season, a ruthless domination of qualifying, and wheel-to-wheel brilliance that made him almost untouchable. In just 8 seasons, he added 6 more world titles, bringing his total to 7, equaling Michael Schumacher, the man once thought to be untouchable. But it wasn't just the number of wins, it was how he won. The wet weather masterclasses, the comeback drives from the back of the grid, the poise under pressure, and of course, the battles with Vettel, with Rosberg, and most recently with Max Verstappen. The 2021 season was a story in itself. Hamilton and Verstappen clash across the globe, on and off the track. And when the championship decider in Abu Dhabi came around, the world watched what looked set to be Hamilton's 8th coronation. He led the race, lap after lap, controlling the tempo. Then came the crash. Then came the restart. Then came the controversy. F1 made a call that will be debated for years, selectively moving cars out of the way, handing Verstappen fresher tires and 1 lap to race. It was a robbery in the eyes of many. Hamilton lost the title not because he was outdriven, but because the system failed him. The heartbreak was immeasurable, but Hamilton kept quiet, not a word to the media for weeks. But the pain, the silence, the betrayal, it was there. Still, in typical fashion, he returned, not bitter, not defeated, just resolute. And in December 2021, he was knighted by the now King Charles. Sir Lewis Hamilton, the boy once mocked for dreaming too big, now had the crown to go with the legacy. What followed, however, was a surprising downturn. Mercedes, once invincible, stumbled. The new regulations caught them out. Hamilton went winless in 2022 and again in 2023. For the first time in his career, questions arose. Was this the end? Had time finally caught up with him? Then came the bombshell in February 2024. Hamilton would leave Mercedes and join Ferrari for the 2025 season. It was a move that shocked the world. The prancing horse and the knight joined forces. It sounded like fiction, but it was real. The time is right, Hamilton said, and maybe it was. After all, how does one follow 7 titles, hundreds of podiums, and global stardom? By chasing something even harder, reviving Ferrari's glory. His final year at Mercedes was bittersweet. He took 2 victories, including a record-breaking 9th win at Silverstone, in front of a crowd that treated him like royalty. The message was clear. He was still there, still fast, still hungry, and then, in January 2025, he pulled on the red suit for the first time and drove a Ferrari at Fiorano. It was symbolic, cinematic, and deeply emotional. He wasn't just joining Ferrari, he was becoming part of its legend. Now paired with Charles Leclerc, Ferrari's golden child, Hamilton is no longer the wide-eyed rookie. He's the wise veteran, the 7-time champion, the fighter who's seen it all. The season opener in Melbourne will be the start of a new chapter. And whether it ends with an 8th title or not, one thing is certain. Lewis Hamilton has already transcended Formula One. He holds almost every meaningful record in the sport. Most wins, 105, most podiums, 202, most pole positions, 104, and tied for most championships, 7. He's raced in 356 Grand Prix and scored over 4,800 points. But numbers only tell half the story. In fact, it's a moment the world would remember forever, for all the right reasons. Lewis Hamilton, already a 7-time world champion, stood on the verge of rewriting history books by becoming the most decorated Formula One driver of all time. The stage was set, the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the final race of one of the most intense and emotional seasons the sport had ever witnessed. But what unfolded on that fateful night was not just a twist of fate. It became the most controversial moment in Formula One history. Hamilton had done everything right. The lights went out at Yas Marina, and the Briton, piloting his Mercedes W12 with clinical precision, dominated the race from the moment he snatched the lead off the line. His title rival Max Verstappen hounded him in the early laps, but Lewis's rhythm was relentless, smooth and efficient. Each corner, each lap, he looked like a man on a mission. By lap 53, the title was his to lose. He was nearly 14 seconds ahead of Verstappen, cruising on hard tires, while the Red Bull behind had already made the switch to fresher softs, gambling on the off chance of a late intervention. Then, like a scene from a Greek tragedy, Nicholas Latifi lost control of his Williams and crashed into the barriers at turn 14. The safety car was deployed. In mere moments, Hamilton's hard-earned lead began to vanish. It was supposed to be a procedural wrap-up. The race would likely end under safety car conditions, and the championship would be Hamilton's, his 8th, the one that would silence every doubter, the one that would place him on a throne no one had ever touched before. But that isn't what happened. Initially, race director Michael Massey instructed that lap cars, of which there were 7, would not be allowed to overtake the safety car. That decision preserved Hamilton's lead and gave him a crucial buffer against Verstappen's charge. Everyone in the paddock, everyone watching at home understood that. The regulations were being followed to the letter. Then, with the world holding its breath and the race clock ticking down, Massey changed everything. On lap 57, 1 lap before the race was set to end, the race director made a staggering call. Only 5 of the 7 lap cars, specifically the 5 directly between Hamilton and Verstappen, were allowed to unlap themselves. In a move that shocked teams, commentators, and fans alike, the remaining 2 cars were left in place. No explanation, no consistency. The rules, which dictated that all lap cars must be allowed through before a restart, were bent or broken. Suddenly, Verstappen was right behind Hamilton with fresh soft tires, while Lewis remained on old hard compounds. There was no time to respond, no opportunity for a pit stop, no second chances. The race resumed with 1 single lap remaining, and in that one final lap, Max Verstappen overtook Lewis Hamilton to win the race and, with it, the championship. Toto Wolff, the usually composed Mercedes team principal, erupted over the radio in disbelief. "No, Michael, no! That was so not right!" he yelled at the race director. It wasn't just frustration, it was heartbreak. The fallout began immediately. Mercedes launched a protest, challenging the legality of the decisions made. They claimed that Verstappen had overtaken under the safety car and that Massey's mid-race rule shift was a breach of sporting integrity. The stewards rejected the protest. Verstappen was crowned champion. The podium celebrations went ahead, but something felt hollow. Not just to Hamilton fans, but to many across the sport. The silence from Lewis said more than words ever could. He stood with dignity, refusing to lash out publicly. There were no angry interviews, just a quiet, piercing expression of disbelief. But the controversy didn't die there. Behind closed doors, Mercedes considered escalating the appeal to the International Court of Appeals. They weighed the consequences, dragging the sport through the mud or letting the injustice pass unchallenged. In the end, they chose not to proceed. It was over, at least on paper. To understand the magnitude of what was lost, you have to understand what Lewis Hamilton stood to gain. An 8th title would have been more than a number. It would have been the final stamp of his era. The undeniable proof that no one had done it better, longer, or more dominantly. He had battled the fiercest rivals, endured the toughest cars, and redefined what it meant to be fast. Abu Dhabi 2021 wasn't just another race. It was the culmination of 2 decades of hard work, sacrifice, and unparalleled excellence. So when you watch him line up on the grid now, wearing red instead of silver, know that it's more than just another race. It's the next act in the career of a man who never belonged to the system, but conquered it anyway.